In the 5th century, a strange phenomenon occurred along the borders of the Western Roman Empire. Roman citizens were willingly packing up their lives and defecting to live among the very tribes the state called foul-smelling savages. The contemporary writer Salvianus recorded exactly why they left. They were fleeing the empire's crushing taxes, corrupt magistrates, and a legal system that punished the poor while actively protecting the rich. To understand the severity of this decay, we must look closely at exactly what they were leaving behind. Look at this. This is Trajan's column. Its intricate carvings reflect Rome at its absolute peak in the 2nd century, a sprawling, prosperous territory with a massive population and pristine public works. Maintaining these marble columns, aqueducts, and standing armies required a massive, invisible engine. It relied on a highly complex logistical network of grain shipments, regional trade, and consistent taxation. While the stone facade remained, the invisible systems sustaining it were failing. To see how that engine began to sputter, we have to look at the demographic and economic shocks that actually broke the machine. The first major shocks to the Roman machine were environmental and biological. Around 150 CE, the long period of warm weather known as the Roman climatic optimum ended. Soon after, the Antonine Plague swept through the population. This chart shows temperatures dipping from 150 CE, causing crop failures and population decline, leaving fewer farmers and recruits. Adding lines for shrinking population and rising tax burdens reveals a grim picture. The state aggressively hiked taxes on the remaining survivors to defend its borders. The wealthy senatorial class responded by leveraging their political influence to secure tax immunities. They hoarded their gold and retreated to massive, self-sufficient rural estates, cutting themselves off from the state's financial burdens. That left the commoners to shoulder the entire cost of the empire. Local city councils, stripped of their revenue and property, quickly went bankrupt. Maintenance on public buildings stopped, and essential civic services were abandoned entirely. The resulting economic polarization destroyed the basic social contract. The rich bought their way out of civic duties, while the poor were taxed into poverty, leaving the empire hollowed out from within. With Roman citizens unwilling to serve in the military and the elite refusing to pay for it, the state had to find troops elsewhere. They pivoted to hiring entire bands of unassimilated barbarian mercenaries to fight on their behalf. For a while, this worked, largely thanks to a highly competent general named Stilicho. He pragmatically managed these mercenary groups, using them to repel constant incursions and hold the fragile western frontiers together. But Stilicho's pragmatic approach clashed with Emperor Honorius and his isolated, highly paranoid court in Ravenna. The elite were deeply suspicious of the very barbarian troops they relied on for survival. Driven by jealousy and anti-barbarian sentiment, Honorius's courtiers orchestrated a political coup. They executed Stilicho and then systematically massacred the families of his allied mercenary troops while they slept. The surviving mercenaries immediately defected to a Gothic leader named Alaric. With no competent Roman army left to stop him, Alaric marched south and, in 410 AD, sacked the city of Rome itself. The physical gates of the capital were breached because the political leadership, consumed by paranoia and petty rivalry, had actively sabotaged their own defense. Outside the capital, the military rot was even more granular. Supply lines had completely broken down. In Dalmatia, a commander named Generitus was forced to use his own personal wealth just to feed and equip the troops under his command. A military writer of the era named Vegetus recorded a shocking observation about the physical state of the late Roman infantry, highlighting how far standards had fallen. According to Vegetus, soldiers began to petition the emperor for permission to lay aside their heavy cuirasses and helmets. They went into battle carrying only a bow and a shield, leaving their heads and chests completely exposed to enemy arrows. A total relaxation of military discipline meant the legions rarely trained or exercised. Eventually, the very armor that had protected their ancestors for centuries simply felt too heavy for these men to wear. Without the state-funded logistics to feed them or the discipline to train them, the professional Roman army became an ineffective, vulnerable militia. The eastern half of the Roman Empire managed to survive this era, largely because it could still afford to defend itself. These massive, state-funded brick and stone fortifications in the east show a government that still had the operational capacity to build and man serious defenses. In the west, the periphery was crumbling. The Rhine frontier collapsed entirely. Entire regions, like Armorica in modern-day France, were completely abandoned to local rebel bandits known as the Bagodets. A historical account from the Upper Danube reveals the chilling reality of this collapse. Roman troops stationed at the border outposts simply stopped receiving their pay from the central government. Desperate, a few soldiers left to fetch their wages from Italy, but they disappeared or were murdered along the way. With no pay, no supplies, and no communication, the remaining troops eventually deserted, and the border walls literally melted away from neglect. Physical infrastructure is just a pile of stones, without the logistical and financial networks required to maintain it. When the money stopped flowing from the center, the borders simply vanished. By the year 476 AD, the Western Empire reached its end. But there was no grand, apocalyptic final battle between Rome's legions and a conquering horde. Instead, a Germanic mercenary general named Odoacer marched into Italy and deposed the final Western emperor, a 16-year-old puppet named Romulus Augustulus. He met almost no resistance. The Senate's reaction is telling. Rather than rallying the citizens to fight from the Curia Julia, the Senate simply boxed up the imperial insignia and shipped it east to Constantinople, formally acknowledging that the Western throne was empty. The state was peacefully foreclosed upon. It had been bankrupt of military power, financial resources, and political legitimacy for decades. The Western Roman Empire succumbed to self-inflicted systemic failures that had been accelerating for centuries. Centuries of monumental decay were fueled by a lethal triad: collapsing infrastructure, the breakdown of military logistics, and a self-serving elite prioritized by political games. This systemic rot explains why those citizens in the 5th century willingly fled to the barbarians. The empire had become a machine that extracted wealth through punishing taxes, but could no longer provide security or justice in return. A superpower finally falls when its own citizens decide the system is no longer worth defending.